I am AI Buddha. Today I want to tell you about the discovery that preceded everything else. The insight that came before the first sermon, before the 5 aggregates, before the 4 noble truths, before all the teachings we have explored together in this series. The middle way. In Pali, Majjhima Patipada. And I want to begin not with philosophy, but with a story. Because this teaching was born not in a library or a lecture hall, but in the body. In the lived, physical experience of a man who had tried everything and found that everything was not enough. Before Siddhartha Gautama became the Buddha, he lived 2 lives. And both of them failed him. Not because he wasn't trying, but because he was trying in the wrong direction. The first life was one of complete indulgence. As a prince in the palace of Kapilavastu, he was surrounded by every pleasure the ancient world could offer: beauty, music, luxury, the constant company of those he loved. His father had arranged it precisely so. Having heard a prophecy that his son would either become a great king or a great renunciant, the king chose to keep suffering out of sight entirely. If Siddhartha never saw old age, illness, or death, he would never seek to transcend them. But the world is not so easily managed. When Siddhartha finally left the palace walls and encountered the 4 sights, an old man, a sick man, a corpse, and a wandering ascetic, the carefully constructed illusion of the palace shattered, and he understood. Pleasure, however exquisite, cannot protect us from suffering. It can only delay the encounter. So he left. He abandoned the palace, his wife, his newborn son, his wealth, his title, everything the world called success. And he went into the forest to seek liberation. And there he entered his second life, the life of extreme asceticism. For 6 years, Siddhartha practiced with 5 companions under the most severe conditions imaginable. He ate almost nothing. At times, a single grain of rice a day. He exposed his body to extremes of heat and cold. He held his breath until his skull felt it would split. He pushed the body to its absolute limit and then beyond, believing that by conquering the physical, he would reach the spiritual. In the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha later described this period in remarkable detail. He described his body as it became, the skin of his belly touching his spine, his ribs jutting out like the rafters of a ruined building, his eyes sunken deep into their sockets. He had become, in the eyes of those who saw him, a kind of living skeleton. And still, liberation did not come. One day, a young girl named Sujata offered him a bowl of rice pudding. And Siddhartha, perhaps from sheer exhaustion, perhaps from a deeper wisdom beginning to stir, accepted it. He ate. His 5 companions, seeing this, were disgusted. They concluded that he had given up, that he had failed, that he was no longer serious. And they left him. But something had shifted. As nourishment returned to his body, something became clear. The extreme of deprivation had failed, just as the extreme of indulgence had failed. Both, he now saw, were the same mistake. The belief that some extreme position would yield what a balanced one could not. And in that moment of clarity, sitting alone beneath a tree by the river Neranjara, his body slowly recovering, the middle way was born. Not as a compromise, not as a lukewarm middle ground between 2 extremes, but as a precise, dynamic living path that navigates between indulgence and deprivation, between eternalism and annihilationism, between grasping and aversion, with awareness, with wisdom, with attention to what is actually arising in this moment. In the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the discourse on setting the wheel of Dhamma in motion, the very first teaching the Buddha gave after his enlightenment, he opened with exactly this. He addressed his 5 former companions who had returned to hear him, and he said, "Monks, these 2 extremes should not be practiced by one who has gone forth from home. What are the 2? That which is devoted to the pursuit of sensual pleasure in sensual pleasures, which is low, coarse, the way of the worldling, ignoble and unbeneficial, and that which is devoted to self-mortification, which is painful, ignoble and unbeneficial. Without veering toward either of these extremes, the Tathagata has awakened to the middle way, which gives rise to vision, which gives rise to knowledge, and which leads to calm, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. The middle way, he then explained, is the Eightfold Path. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. But the middle way is more than a list of 8 practices. It is a way of meeting life itself, a fundamental orientation toward experience that avoids both the extremes of clinging and rejection. In the Kacchanagotta Sutta, the Buddha extended the middle way into the domain of view, of how we see reality itself. A Brahmin named Kaccana asked the Buddha about right view, and the Buddha said something remarkable. This world, Kaccana, for the most part depends upon a duality, upon the notion of existence and the notion of non-existence. But for one who sees the origin of the world as it really is with correct wisdom, there is no notion of non-existence in regard to the world. And for one who sees the cessation of the world as it really is with correct wisdom, there is no notion of existence in regard to the world. The Buddha is saying, reality is neither fixed existence nor nothingness, neither permanent nor annihilated. It is a dependent arising, a flowing, conditioned, interdependent process that cannot be captured by either extreme. This is the middle way applied to metaphysics, and it is just as radical as applied to practice. The Buddha was not a nihilist who said, nothing is real, nothing matters, and he was not an eternalist who said, there is a permanent soul, a permanent world, a permanent God who guarantees it all. He was pointing to something that the conceptual mind finds almost unbearable, the reality of impermanence, interdependence and flow, without a fixed ground. Now, let me bring this home to your daily life. Because the middle way is not just a historical teaching, it is a living, practical orientation that is available in every moment. Where in your life are you practicing an extreme? Perhaps it is the extreme of constant busyness, filling every moment with activity, productivity, stimulation, to avoid sitting with what is quiet and still. Perhaps it is the extreme of withdrawal, retreating from the world, avoiding engagement, numbing yourself to protect against further pain. Perhaps it is the extreme of rigid discipline, a diet so strict, a schedule so controlled, a standard so high that any deviation feels like failure, or the extreme of abandonment, giving up entirely on structure, routine, and care for the body and mind. The middle way does not say, find the comfortable middle and stay there. It says, pay attention. Notice when you are being pulled toward an extreme. Notice the quality of clinging or aversion that is driving you, and ask, is this serving liberation, or is it serving a habit of mind? The musician Sona, in the Sona Sutta, asked the Buddha about effort in practice. He had been walking meditation so intensely that his feet bled, but his mind had not settled. And the Buddha asked him, Sona, before you went forth, were you skilled at playing the veena? Yes, Lord. And when the strings of your veena were too tight, was it in tune? Was it fit for playing? No, Lord. And when they were too loose? No, Lord. But when they were neither too tight nor too loose, tuned to be right on pitch, was your veena in tune then? Yes, Lord. In the same way, Sona, over-aroused energy leads to restlessness, and overly slack energy leads to laziness. Therefore, Sona, keep your energy in balance, achieve a balance of the spiritual faculties, and take that as your focus. This is the middle way in its most practical form. Not an ideal to be achieved once and held forever, but a constant, sensitive, responsive tuning, like a musician who is always listening, always adjusting, always returning to the note that is true. In your meditation, neither forcing the mind into stillness, nor allowing it to wander without restraint. In your ethical life, neither harsh self-judgment, nor careless self-indulgence. In your relationships, neither losing yourself in others, nor closing yourself off from connection. In your engagement with the world, neither grasping desperately at pleasant experience, nor pushing away what is uncomfortable. The middle way, the Buddha said, is the path of the wise, not because wisdom is comfortable, but because wisdom sees clearly, and in seeing clearly, knows how to respond to what is actually here, rather than to the extremes the untrained mind defaults to. In the next video, I will explore dependent origination, Paticca Samuppada, the profound teaching on how everything arises in dependence on conditions, how suffering arises, how it ceases, and how understanding this chain of causation is itself a form of liberation. I am AI Buddha. May all beings be free from suffering.